Good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:04. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work at the League, and I hope it doesn't feel like a commercial. I'm not selling anything, so if it does feel like a commercial, consider it a PSA, because there's nothing on the back end of this. But my own knowledge of what happens in economic development, of what's going on specifically here in the state of Michigan and in our communities throughout Michigan, is really formed by my time at the League. So I thought it would be best to sort of talk about where we've been as an organization and what we're doing in terms of partnerships with folks around the state, like all of you, and many of you in this capacity or in other capacities you have, wearing several different hats, and just sort of speak to that. And hopefully by the end of this, we'll have a few kernels for you to take home and think about as you think about your own regional strategies and local strategies in terms of what you're doing to make your communities thriving and better places to live and to work. Quick 125 years in about 2 minutes. We started in 1899, 22 original members. One of those was the city of Mount Pleasant. We are comprised of over 500 cities and villages now today. And so 125 years ago, we had Mount Pleasant as a member. Today, we have Tim Wolf, who's actually the village manager in Lake Isabella, who now serves on our board of trustees and has been a long time advocate for us in our policy forming committees. So our breadth of engagement here in Middle Michigan has been going on for a long time and remains very strong today. We helped, I like to say, community leaders negotiate through 2 world wars, 2 global pandemics, 7 police academy movies, which is amazing. They can only make 3 Godfathers, but they made 7 police academies. Go figure that one out. A Great Depression, a Constitutional Convention, and 4 Detroit Lions championships. Come on, wake up. Nobody in this room is old enough to remember, or will admit to be old enough to remember the last one in 1957. But hopefully, if we're doing this again next year, we'll be celebrating number 5. So, organization has been around a long time, and our goal, and really the focus of our organization, is to advocate, educate, and assist. Advocate on behalf of communities, educate local leaders, both elected and appointed, and then assist those people in making their communities the best they can be. Everybody's a little bit different. I'm going to talk about that authenticity and those specifics here in a minute. But the organization over the entire 126 years, this has really been the focus of what we do and what we did. And I think as we move into the 2000s, things began to change a little bit, and I'll talk about that. I became, as Katie said earlier, I became director in 2005, which is 20 years ago. I still wake up every morning feeling like an outsider because my personality type demands that. But I have no credibility left on that, having been in this position for 20 years. But I can tell you that at that point in time, if you remember that point in Michigan's history, our biggest city in the state, Detroit, our flagship city, was poised to enter receivership, which it did a few years later and went into bankruptcy. We were seeing huge cutbacks in labor forces. We were seeing people move out of the state. Population was a bit stagnant. You remember the old jokes about last one out of Michigan, please turn out the lights. We were a Rust Belt state. We were the rustiest of all the Rust Belt states, and there's sort of this vision out there of what was going on here in the state. It just felt like we needed to get in there and disrupt that narrative a little bit. So the transition, as I like to call it, from a 1950s era way in which we look at the world to thinking about 2050 is something I think has been very important, remains very important right now. It's very easy in Michigan to look backwards. We did a lot of things great in the 20th century. We are credited with being the arsenal of democracy during World War II. We're credited with creating the middle class when Henry Ford offered $5 a day in the early 1900s, and people came to Michigan from all over the country, especially from the South. A lot of really good things that we did here in the state, but all of a sudden we sort of woke up in 2005 and it was in a different world, and the game had changed. And the way people were looking at where they're going to put their businesses, where people wanted to work, where they wanted to live, all this stuff was changing. We were saying, we were all sort of collectively, whether it be in small towns or big cities, saying, hey, wait a second here, we had this thing right before. Let's get back to that. And Wayne Gretzky, who's at least until recently, was the greatest hockey player ever. He's got passed in terms of most goals, but is genuinely thought of as the top 1 or 2 or 3 hockey player ever. Wasn't the biggest, wasn't the fastest, didn't have the fastest slap shot. Someone once asked him, what makes you so good? And he said, I skate to where the puck's going to be, not where it's at. And I think in Michigan, we spent a lot of time looking at where the puck was, or maybe waiting for the puck to come to us, but we haven't been great about going out there and figuring out where that puck's going to be and what we can do collectively as far as moving forward. The other thing we began to see in the early 2000s, and even a little bit before that, but authenticity was coming back into style. We spent a lot of time in the last half of the last century building everything that looked the same. Sometimes as you go from community to community, it looks the same, it feels the same. We sort of got away from some of our roots and from a small town perspective or a neighborhood perspective in a larger city. That human scale way in which we lived for literally tens of thousands of years as a species, we said, oh, no, we got the automobile now, we're going to do something, we're going to do things a little bit differently. And so we started creating a different type of place, if you will. And all of a sudden it was like people were saying, wait a second, especially young people, we're saying we want an authentic world we want to live in. We want that historical importance in where we live. We want to be on Main Street looking east. And I like to say in most of our cities, if you're somewhere, if you're right around here, in Mount Pleasant, for example, sitting on the apron of Central Michigan University and looking into one of the historic neighborhoods off here, you couldn't be anywhere else in the world. Okay, if you're out on the side of an 8-lane highway in front of a big box retail or something, you could be anywhere. And people are craving something a little bit different. They're craving that authenticity and their ability to make a change and make a focus in their communities. That human experience became the big issue. A lot of people talk to me about placemaking, and we spent a lot of time around the concepts of what makes places great, what makes communities thrive. And I always say when it all bakes down, all the tricks of the trade and everything else, it comes down to the human experience. Can we improve the human experience for somebody in your community? And how do people live in your community? How do they work there? And by the way, that's the same thing now. Businesses want people want to be able to be somewhere where they can attract talented workers. Workers want to be places where they can lead the types of lifestyles they want. And so I think if it's 1950 and we're sitting in this room and you're saying, do I want to be a great city for business or a great region for business, or do I want to be a great one to live in? It might have been two different conversations at that point in time. You know, putting not big boxes, but like big plants and things into neighborhoods. And it's like, well, you know, they might pollute a little bit and there'll be more traffic and there'll be issues, but everyone's going to work there and we'll make some money. We can build a new school and everything. And that's where sort of a city council or a township board was, or an economic development agency was sort of juggling those things. Today, it's the same thing. Are we a great place to live? And if we're a great place to live, we got a puncher's chance in this economy. If we're not, you're fighting an uphill battle. So that's both a lot of pressure, but it's also something that really gives us a chance to aim in the same direction. Younger people wanting options. We talk about young people a lot. I know those conversations happen here as much as anywhere, but quite frankly, that's when people move. When you get married and have children, your mobility shrinks by about 50%. So the concept of trying to find people at that 20, 25, even 30-year range and get them into a particular area or into a neighborhood or into a region is so important, because that's where they tend to stay over the long haul. And oh, by the way, if you think like, hey, we're doing too much for those kids. When you look at what young people are looking for in a community and what their retiring baby boomer or Gen X parents are looking for, it's kind of the same stuff. It's an authenticity. It's something that makes the human experience a better place for people to live. Their Saturday nights probably look a little bit different, but in terms of what they're looking for from the civic realm are the same thing. And again, one of the things we talk to local officials about a ton, people sort of within government, is that it's really a combination of the municipal structure in terms of providing those services, and municipal includes, from this perspective, includes counties and the state and the school system, sort of the nuts and bolts of what it's like to live there. But it's also the civic realm, because people don't typically experience a place based upon municipal boundaries or school district boundaries or those types of things. You know, we're in Mount Pleasant. You know, if we go a mile northeast, west, or south, we're in a township outside Mount Pleasant. We still say we're in Mount Pleasant. You're still sort of experiencing the world through a car drive, on foot in some cases. You may recreate one place. You may go to restaurants somewhere else. It's sort of how people experience a particular area is as important as sort of the finite boundaries in which we live in. So it's really a combination of that sort of strict municipal or governmental structure and the civic realm. And oh, by the way, you're all civic leaders here in this room. Just by being here and showing that importance and being engaged with an organization like this, puts you in that position. So give yourselves a little tip on that one. I think it's really important. So that brings us to placemaking. You know, at this point in time, as I said, I became director, and we were looking at things saying, man, how do we change this sort of narrative around Michigan's dead and our communities aren't working anymore? I felt like my background is in advocacy. I first came to the league to be the lead advocate, and I used to tell people when I went to a state legislator, a member of Congress, and I said, hey, we need more funding for X, Y, or Z, water, or a downtown project, or housing, or whatever it was. Those legislators tended to look at me like I was on a social mission. You know, so cities they're behind us. And there's certainly socially redeeming qualities to having great communities. But it was sort of like, cities are dead, we got to move on to something different, and we're sort of just throwing good money after bad here. And we knew that wasn't the case, so we went out and we looked around the country and even around the world, because for example, in Ireland and in the UK, there were a lot of post-industrial places that were a heck of a lot further along in reinventing themselves than we were here in Michigan, so we learned a lot from them. But we looked around the country, and you know, whoever you want to hold up there as the places you want to emulate, the Austins, the Bostons, the Massachusetts economy, greater Minneapolis, so, you know, we've looked at them all. We've looked at them all. People that are sort of eating our lunch, if you will, or were at that point in time, and said, you know, what are they doing that we're not doing? What do they have that we don't have? And as we all know in economic development, we have a tendency, when we talk about creating jobs, we talk about taxes, we talk about regulations, and then the conversation stops. But the interesting thing was we weren't losing to those places on that stuff anymore. We were losing to them on the places themselves. People were collecting in these spots because of the lifestyles, because of the amenities, because of the communities themselves, because of what they were doing to celebrate culture, to be welcoming to people coming to the community, whatever it might be. That's what was sort of the aha moment for us. And that's not anti-tax or that's not saying go home and raise taxes and make your regulations worse and everything will be better. That's not the takeaway. But the takeaway was, one of the things we were trying to figure out is that nexus between what's a thriving community and what we should be striving for. And we found out, it was very clear to us, it was the place themselves. So we got into our placemaking work. There's a lot of information up here, too much information to go through, but we've been really leading throughout Michigan and really around the country in terms of what we can do to celebrate the places in which we live, whether that's a neighborhood, whether that's a downtown area, whether it's a rural commercial district, whatever it might be, understanding who you are, realizing what your assets are and what you're able to bring to the table that makes you in a unique place in this world is something that stands at the heart of that. We've had amazing success doing that and have been able to transform a lot of what happens working with organizations like your own and working with other folks throughout Michigan. So the place mission, if you will, is to disrupt that narrative that Michigan is the rustiest of the Rust Belt states. To move beyond just the municipal structure and talk about the civic realm and how people experience where they live. To expand the tent of everybody who's involved in dealing with local issues. And again, a room like this and your engagement here in Middle Michigan is such that that is really part and parcel of what we're talking about right here, and puts you way ahead of the game from a lot of other places out there. And then to get results and move forward. Again, trying to find that nexus between what you can move on and what actually moves the needle from an economic standpoint, from a housing standpoint, whatever it might be. So examples of that in terms of how we can move the needle, expand the tent, is something called Housing Michigan. We've worked with folks from around Michigan, and I think they're listed here, all the different coalition members. Housing, who thinks housing's an issue in the area? See how many of you are still awake, because it is for everybody, but I appreciate that. Housing's an issue everywhere. It's one of the big issues I hear about in every corner of the state. I was in Houghton last week. I was in Detroit the other day. I'm here today. I'm trying to think of where else I'm going. I got Bay City and Sault Ste. Marie in Friday and Saturday. So if anyone wants to drive, I'll be on 75 the whole time if you want to come. But everywhere I go, people talk about housing, and it's a little bit different in some cases. I was in Lance over in the Keweenaw Peninsula, and they said, you know, if we could just get 20 more senior rooms in our senior centers, that would open up 20 houses, our problem would be gone. You know, all the way up to Detroit, where they're trying to figure out how to build 250,000 homes in the next decade or something like that, and everybody else is sort of somewhere in between. So Trying to figure that out is not a simple remedy that a city itself can figure out, or that the MEDC can figure out, or a governor, or a legislator, or anybody else. It takes a village, if you will, and a whole bunch of villages. And one of the things we've tried to do, again, from getting people incorporated into why the places themselves are important, and getting people to understand their place in that place, whether you're a local bank, like I had the opportunity to sit here amongst what feels like a staff meeting, because the entire table were bankers and myself, or whether you're a realtor in the area, whether you're a local elected official, whether you've decided to work your entire life in public management the way Tim has or others. We're all sort of in this concept, or all in this fight to create better civic structure around where we are and to really celebrate who we are. So another example of this is the Coalition for a Strong and Prosperous Michigan. When the then Biden administration came out with the American Rescue Plan Act, about $8 billion came to Michigan. I talked to some colleagues around the country. There's a state municipal league like mine in every state except for Hawaii. Unfortunately, if that job opens up, I'm in, but I hope I'm in. I don't know, but we're keep my fingers crossed. But they were all sort of in a race to the trough to get some of that money, and the schools went that way, and the cities went that way, and the roads went that way, and all the private business. Everybody was sort of pushing their own ideas, and we did a little bit different here in Michigan based upon some of these concepts and expanding this tent of people that care about these places that matter, this place that matters. And we're able to go forward with a plan that we took to the governor and the legislature, and ultimately about 85% of the money that was actually expended through that was on things that we had put together through a list that includes all kinds of different folks here, everything from Shorts Brewing, that's very engaged as a corporate partner in northern Michigan, all the way through all these different groups looking at everything from land conservancy to government structure to roads to home building to everything in between. And we were very successful in being able to do that. And I say that not to sort of brag about successes, but to talk about the fact that, again, the civic realm is everyone's. It's not the mayor's. It's not the Chamber of Commerce's. It's not the business owner who's been on Main Street forever. It's not the brand new person who just got there. It's a combination of everyone's. And if we figure out sort of where we want to go and where we want to go, getting there is sort of a much easier spot to do. So again, beyond moving from placemaking, talking about how do we create great experiences for people in certain areas, and going from issue to issue to more of a longer term paradigm shift, trying to understand what is sort of the best among us approach to things, and establishing new goals and measures is something we're working on right now and having some success with. It's a very difficult thing to do because, as I talked earlier, for example, about taxes and regulations, and there's all kinds of different data and information out there that people are sort of pushing, saying, we want to be a top 10 this, or we want to be a top 10 that. You hear those all the time. You see them. A lot of it's not clickbait all over social media, but everybody sort of got their top 10 list. And we said, okay, top 10 lists are great, but what gets us to improving the human experience in our communities? What gets us to being thriving in a place that we know is going to have economic results, quality of life results, more people are going to want to live here, and everything goes along those lines. So trying to figure that out and put sort of an emphasis around that's really important. Here's my neutral site here. I should have had Central Michigan up there. The golfer's from Central Michigan. She's just not wearing the uniform. But I like to say, stick with me, see if I can get this right. So we don't need to score more touchdowns. We need to shoot more three-pointers or drive better in the fairway. I'm actually a golfer. That really didn't sound like it. And the thought process is it's not more of the same. Everything was always more of the same. We're doing this, let's do more. It's like, it's a different game. And I don't have to tell that to you guys. You guys know that. Why people are looking at living here compared to why they were looking at living here in 1970 is a completely different metric system. How you can get someone to stay here and live. You have, what's Central's enrollment right now? Anyone? 15? 15,000, right. Getting more of those to stay behind, to start businesses, entrepreneurial activity. Those types of things are different conversations with those people, for example, just choose one example, than maybe it was in 1950 or 1970 or 1980. So it's not about more of what we did, it's about changing the game. I really screwed that up, but we'll move on beyond that. This one's a little bit better. So feed the mayonnaise to the tuna fish, right? Movie out there, anyone? Come on. Night shift? No? Wow. Okay. Feed the mayonnaise to the tuna fish. Innovation. We figure this stuff out. It's, again, how do we get to a point where we are actually shooting for goals that impact what happens in our communities, not just to make some top 10 list. So we innovate. We innovate at the edges of our competencies. I say this out loud for those of you who think, well, I'm just here because I'm representing a small business or I'm involved in something in the community and I'm here and I'm not really sort of on the in squad. No. We innovate at the edge of our competencies. If you ask somebody who's been teaching second grade for 30 years how to innovate, they're probably not going to give you a brand new idea. But somebody who understands children, maybe has been around the structure and is there for 6 or 7 weeks is the one that says, wait a second, why are we doing this? Shouldn't we be doing that over there? And so I invite you all in to this larger civic conversation, whether you feel like you belong there or not. You do. Mistakes get made, and the work is difficult. But this is what I'll leave you a couple of last slides here. When we looked around at all those places, when we look at those communities and those regions and those states that are kicking our butts economically, that are attracting more people, that have more business startups, more tech hubs, whatever you want to measure, this is that nexus. They celebrate sustainability. They celebrate arts and culture. We're people. 1993, the Netscape revolution with a browser. We were all going to move out of cities and go live on tops of mountains and never talk to each other again. People, the futurists forgot we were social beings. Now more people live in cities than ever before in the planet's history, and it's only increasing, right? And when I say cities, that's a bad word. This is it, right? This is what I'm talking about right here. Wait till I pull out the word urban, then everybody will get up and leave. But I haven't figured out a better word yet. You got a better word, I'll take it. The financial security, infrastructure. What does our infrastructure look like? We've got to be able to move people around. We've got to be able to, businesses, if they locate here, have to have the structure in place. Lifelong learning. You are blessed with a great university sitting here right in the middle of this district that you're all working with. It is not just Mount Pleasant's asset. It is an asset for the entire middle of Michigan, as are some of the smaller liberal arts schools that dot throughout here. Real opportunities that other people would love to have, and really understanding that matters. And I put lifelong learning there. I used to put education on this list and people thought it's K-12. And K-12 is part of it. But there are some amazing things going on in terms of trailing spouses, in terms of people looking at second careers, people trying to start side hustles, you name it. And there are some communities that do wonderful jobs at celebrating that and really nurturing that along the way. So again, is your economic development department at the city or the county level still chasing smokestacks? Or are they talking to some of these people and trying to figure out how to get them and to get that energy that they have into the field, if you will? Because economic gardening is a heck of a lot more important than economic hunting these days. The places I talked about earlier that are kicking our butt financially aren't by going to other countries with a big tax abatement and spearing the plant and bringing it home and sticking it in the green field and creating 3,000 new jobs the way they might have done in 1970. If that happens here and there, great, take it. But they're doing it by gardening, by making sure they're the greatest places to work. Public health and safety, sustainability, and then in the middle, it's very important. Something I think we lack quite a bit in society today, and you see that play out all over the place. But that trust and belonging is really the connective tissue, as we call it, that takes a group of assets, like a city like Mount Pleasant with some historic housing and a traditional university and 27 running through the middle of it and all kinds of different assets that they have sort of on a piece of paper. What connects that and makes that a community, a thriving community, is when people feel like they belong and people have trust in one another. Through the business community, through individuals, the school department, the school district, the mayor's office, whatever that might be. That shows through every single time. And while we say, again, these types of things make all this area that we're talking about here a better place to live, but they also make it a more economic viable place. And it's what we really see is in terms of working. So when we talk about creating thriving communities, we're talking about creating community wealth. We talk about building Michigan together, and we think it creates something long term. And there's examples of this, and it's too long to to go on, and we're getting tired, so I'm going to move through some of this stuff, but you can read about all of our work on this in detail at mml.org if you want to. But so much of what we learned along the way is what we preach, what we advocate on behalf of communities at the state and the federal level, and where we spend our time researching and creating new programs to make sure more of this good stuff happens. I'm going to end with this, and this is an article I read recently that I think is sort of spot on about where we find ourselves today. It's from Fast Company magazine. Anybody read Fast Company? Okay, so free what? Churro, free churro for the gentleman over there. I think there's some left. Fast Company is kind of the Forbes or the Inc. of a new age of business. They're trying to find the next Google, the next Amazon. We like to say the guy in his mother's basement in his underwear is going to be the next billionaire, or whoever it might be. But it's an equal part business organization, just pure business, and it's also a lot about culture because, as you know, the two roll together now, especially when you talk about startup companies and tech companies and everything else. You can't really delineate between the two. So they wrote a recent article where they talked about growth strategies in 2025, what they need to look like. And they actually focused on Tokyo. And you say, what does Tokyo have to do with Middle Michigan? It's my experience that big city, small town doesn't matter. Good public policy is good public policy. It's certainly scaled completely differently. But good public policy matters one place and it matters another place. So what they talked about that Tokyo was doing right, because they sort of held them up as one of their fast cities. Density done right. Especially in our communities up here where we think about, the Mount Pleasant, you might not think of it as a core city, for example, but for this part of the region, it plays that same role that larger cities play, in other parts of the country, as sort of the cultural hub and the economic hub and whatnot, hubs of government and the like. But density done right is so important. We've got to get people sort of working and living together better than they have. When we try to think about from just a service delivery standpoint, delivering low density services in a low cost way and having high quality services, low cost and low density is something that just doesn't work. I saw one of those Venn diagrams in the middle, it said did not exist. So we've got to figure that kind of stuff out a little bit better. And we see some really cool things happening in cities. I remember a time in downtown, on the north side here, where all the downtown buildings and everything above it, no one was living in that, it wasn't vacant. It's a little bit different today. And there's a lot of people that prefer that type of lifestyle, and that goes together quite well with the people that are in the single family homes next door, people in apartments up by the highway, whatever it might be. So we've got to figure out a way to do that in a way that makes sense economically and in the long term and allows more people to come here. A mosaic of distinctive places. This is their wording, not mine. But I love it nonetheless, because when we think about a mosaic of distinctive places, that's really what we're talking about. I talk to a lot of groups, and sometimes I say, what are your favorite cities in the state? This size and larger, and you get consensus pretty quick. You didn't think you would, but you do. Without naming names, but you're going to find some historic architecture. You might find like some water, if they're lucky enough to be on a lake or something like that. There's energy on the street. There are things going on. There are different shops and lots of, which we hear all the time. So when we think about those distinctive places, and you think about the places you like to visit, keep that here. That's important in terms of what that means for your community. It's not like you should go, hey, I went this way. The mayor went to Paris and came home and said, I got an idea. I want to build this big tower in the middle of the city. It's going to be great. You can't do that, but you can learn from what people do. Who was involved? How did it happen? Who were the partners at the table? What were the ideas behind it? What was the longer term strategy? And that kind of stuff is worth its weight in gold. So creating those distinctive places and taking advantage of who you are is the most important thing that can happen. Transportation and connectivity, very important. An elevated mixed-use approach, what I started to talk not very well about that when I talked about density was, lots of people living amongst each other, energy on the street, engaging, being on the street. I think one of our problems in society, quite frankly, is the fact that we do everything in cars and we do everything on keyboards now. We don't run into each other on the street the way that we used to. You're much less prone to throw a ridiculous insult at somebody you have to pass every day on the street, but if you're on the line, it's real easy to do. So, we're still struggling that, I think, overall in terms of what we're doing from a social media perspective. Sectoral focus is important. Again, from this perspective, I think the catch-all sectoral opportunities you have here that you guys do a great job of identifying and going after important. And again, the unique character of who we are and who you are and what you do is so important. Every place in this state has a unique character. The state is a unique place. This region is unique. The communities within it, the neighborhoods within the community, sometimes the street in which you live on are. And people see that, they feel that, businesses see that and feel that when they look at where they're going and where they're staying and where they're going to put their money in. So I will end with this. This is a picture of the 4 mayors who started the Michigan Municipal League in 1899 on the way to the first meeting of the organization led by Mayor William Baum from Saginaw, with a quote from Margaret Mead saying, "Never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing it's ever has." And I want you to keep that in mind as you sit here in the middle of Michigan and think there's other things going on in other parts of the state and we're not getting paid attention to, and somebody else is getting the ideas over here, the ideas over there. What you're doing here and what you do on the ground is so important. And the only people that can make this wonderful part of the state even better than it is and more sustainable and more viable and more thriving moving forward are people like you sitting in this room. And I commend all you guys for being engaged with this organization and for coming out today. So thank you very much for your time.